Listen, thank you very much for having me here. I'm delighted to represent a fantastic community in London, the IPA Social Works team. It's been an operation of 3.5 years, and we're sharing this stuff with you today. It's the first time we've been in Australia, so I think so. It's very, it's some good stuff. There's free stuff, there's prizes, and there's a little bit of jumping around. In fact, let's start with the jumping around. I was going to do this. This is based on Dirk Helbing, who is the world's foremost crowd researcher. And he's got a Hungarian football team, football research team, who go to soccer stadiums around the world, take film of the crowd like this from the centre circle, and then go back to the lab and translate that into mathematics, which they can then turn into highly resolved simulations like this. If you're ever interested in how crowds behave in different spaces, Dirk is your man, helbing.org. But there aren't enough of you in the middle here, so we can't do that. So we're going to do another game. So could you all stand up, please? I want you to sort yourselves out into pairs. So if you're on your own there, then just move down, find this nice gentleman here. If your pair happens to be separated by a row of chairs, then jump over. There we go. But you need to come out, so don't separate yourself by a row of chairs. That is just the way to head to the ER room. This has once gone horribly wrong, I've got to say, and it ended up with, in Norway, someone being thrown across the room. But we'll see how it goes now. So turn and face that person. Turn and face that person. And apologies now to all the Brits in the room. Could you hold that person's hand? Both hands, please. Particularly Peter and Les are finding this difficult, so... how is it? Okay. Shh. So here's the game. The objective of this game is to get your partner off the ground the most times. Get your partner off the ground the most times. Get your partner off the ground the most times. Go! Very good. Very good. Excellent. You can stop jumping now. That's really good. So before we sit down, let's do a quick analysis of what happened there. Salami slices in microseconds. First of all, there was quite a lot of what some of you young people call WTF. And then there was a little bit of strategy discussion. Yes. Tiny bit, which is great. I don't like to see it in public. Keep it to yourselves. But then mostly what happened, within 2 seconds, we had more than 50% of the room doing this one. Within 2 seconds. And we got to 75% after 5, by my count. So that was really good. Who felt they started that?
We did.
Yeah, I'm an influencer. I make people do stuff. So how did it happen then? How did you all get to be doing that, or 75% of you get to be doing that in so little time? You looked around. Yeah, you looked around. There was not much thinking going on. There wasn't a big insight here. Which go, oh, let's do that then. Seems to be all right. No one's pointing and laughing at them. That seems to be a good strategy. Let's do that. The point is, that's how stuff spreads. And with social media, one of the big issues we've got is how does stuff spread? Most of our ideas about how stuff spreads, and we'll do this right at the end, bollocks, frankly. I was going to say bullshit, but Mark Ritson always uses that word, so I can say bollocks instead. We'll come back to this in a little time, but there we are. You've been social at least for a few moments. Thank you very much. So, the king was in the counting house counting out his money, and this king is King Keith. If you work on Unilever, this is your man, Keith Weed. Lovely fella, engineer by training, so he likes counting. He likes counting a lot. He counts his money a lot and wants to know why his money's gone up and why the money's gone down. Why has it gone up and why has it gone down? So he calls in his Chancellor, Lord Chancellor, and says, tell me why this is going up and this is going down. What is it that we're doing that's making it go up and going down? And the Lord Chancellor goes, oh God, this sounds like that Lord Leverhulme conversation about which half of my advertising money is accepted. Exactly, that's exactly what it's like. So which bits of the activity that we're doing sends the numbers up and which sends them down? And the Lord Chancellor says, you know what you need? You need some of that social media, because it's really easy to measure it. Loads of data comes off it, loads of data. So we can measure loads of stuff. In fact, you won't know how much data we could possibly, so you want that. And then this other fella pipes up in the background, and yes, it is he. Bullshit, he says. And I think he's got a point, really. And in fact, Keith agrees with that, and Mark Pritchard at Proctors agrees that many of the media metrics to do with social platforms aren't really worth the paper or the pixels they're written on. I'm not going to talk about the media bit. I'm not talking about viewability. I'm not going to talk about what actual reach is and none of that stuff. I'm going to talk about the impact on the sales or the other important business metrics that social can and should have. And that's what and that's me, hello, and my other friends do. So here's the problem. This is why we need to sort it out. Last year, the big CMO survey, which is a global survey of CMOs, and it's a reasonable sample size, got this prediction out that this base of CMOs, as a survey universe, said that got 21% of their spend by 2020 would be in social media. It's going to take 1/5 of all expenditure. So these guys were saying. 1/5 of all expenditure. It's a huge amount. Social. Huge amount. But, in the same sample, 1 in 10 only CMOs thought that they could quantitatively evaluate the effectiveness of social campaigns and social activity generally. That means 9 out of 10 didn't know or said they couldn't. So it's going to become a huge thing, these guys think, but not many of them think they can, really nobody thinks they can measure it. That's partly because we focus to a certain extent on things like likes, tweets, retweets, clicks. Those are the kind of KPIs that we put into social, and it's just not good enough. And here's why it's not good enough, because currently in this same CMO survey, only 3% thought that social contributed strongly to their business performance. So there's a fashion coming, it's going to take up 1 in 5 of our advertising dollars. Very few people think that they can measure it, and most of them think it doesn't actually work in any substantial way. That's just silly, dangerous for us, because if that 20% of the new budget suddenly becomes vulnerable, which it will be if you can't measure it, it'll disappear. Rather than bother about finding the right budget, it'll just disappear. So we can't afford to lose 20% of the revenue in the industry, so we need to get better at measuring the effectiveness of social. So fortunately, it's not just me on this. I'm just one of many people involved in this project. It's unique, actually. It's a collaboration between all 4 corners of the industry. So it's got the client platform, it's got the marketing society, and some major corporate players that that operate here in Australia as well are participating in the UK. It's got the Market Research Society and the big players in market research and some of the best independent thinkers there as well. The IPA, clearly, who are the headline sponsor of this, represents agencies. We've got some of the best people, both in media and creative, to look at this stuff and contribute to it, and particularly take part in peer reviews and write the reports. We've got the social platforms, though it is always very interesting having Facebook and Twitter in the same room. Always, just be nice. Nice, everyone. Play nicely. We've also got the wonderful Paddy Barwise, whose wisdom helps us get around a lot of the problems that we enhance. And of course, he's got me with my herdiness going on. Here's what we try and do. And this is what I want to introduce you to today, really. We're looking to develop a kind of resource that's the best practice in social media effectiveness and business value. That's what we're trying to do. And we do 3 activities, one of which is trying to develop case law by peer reviewing cases, normally from the top of the pile, the ones which have either entered into FEs or IPA awards or have been published in journals and so on. So those are the kind of things. From that, we want to establish some useful principles. We don't think this is this kind of science that we just heard about before. This is about observing what seem to be the best practices And it would be quite good to have some best practices which weren't vendor-led. Second thing, how-to guides. Turning this into stuff that you can use and refer to so that everybody starts from the same place. A bit more about that in a moment. And then to provide all the industry platforms around the world, and you in Australia are the first people that we've shared all of these platforms with for free. So delighted. We've got 300 cases we've looked at, and only 25 we've established being good enough to be endorsed by this project. Some brands you'll recognize from the AH Beard from around here and so on. Vodafone globally and, you know, the US Navy, God bless them. So there are case studies there which are available for free and for download, which you can have, and each of them covers a slightly different aspect of those 3 buckets of stuff. These are the 3 guides, and which they are. Here's the good news, Australia. As a result of our conversations, these are free to download from tomorrow. All of them free to download for you. So the ipa.co.uk will have them there. Really, really, my purpose is here is to make you download them. It's a penetration game. That's it. That's the main priority of being here. But it's also to get you to contribute back, because the more cases we have, the better. The better the case law, the better the principles that come out of it. And to be honest, the more participation everyone has in the same level of expertise. I'm going to give you 4 thoughts about things you need to think about. It's not as worked through as the stuff that Les and Peter are going to talk about later, because we're still fairly early in the game. But 4 things that, from what we've seen, seem to be important to address this problem about the effective evaluation of social. But first, can I see hands up anyone who managed to fill this in? This is a quiz you were emailed about. Yeah? Very good. Very good. So this is just a bit of fun. It's not science, so we don't know what the universe is that we've managed to sample. We don't know how reflective of the universe the sample we've got, but we've beated it in the UK, and it's now live here in Australia for the first time, which is very exciting. So if you haven't taken the quiz, please do so. Tony put up the link earlier. ipa.co.uk/social quiz. Please take it, it'll tell you what kind of social media marketer you might be. It's a bit of fun. It's a bit like one of those online newspaper quizzes about, you know, what kind of lover would you be or something. Get friends to do it too, because we want to get the largest sample possible. And it helps us, I think, because it asks us what kind of social media marketer you are. And there isn't any one style that dominates the world. There isn't any one answer to any of this, because all of these things seem to be important. But more important than that, all of these things show us we have all something to learn. Let's just go through each of these. And if when I get to this group, you've filled in the quiz, could you please stand up? Or if you recognize yourself as this person, stand up as well. So the first one is a baker. This is embracing the real-time side of, the real-time side of social, testing out multiple approaches. Anyone who did the quiz fall into this? One here? Very good. Stand up, please. I want to see you. Very good. Very good. Real-time. Very good. Excellent. Improvisers. Thank you very much. Sit down. Now the bakers. Open to experimentation. Once you choose a recipe, you like it. There's one there. Very good. And another one. Excellent. Careful planning and scheduling produces the best results. There's a lot of good discipline in this approach. Detectives. Understanding. Anyone a detective? Oh, very good. Yes. It's a big one. Very good. Why a social initiative performed as it did matters almost as much as the actual results. Query the data, and Les loves this. Never forget, correlation is not causation. These two are different things. Influencer. Who's an influencer? Anyone here is an influencer? Very good. It's a bit like I am Spartacus. Influencers. Thank you very much. Sit down. You value social primaries, a way to understand and shape consumer opinion behavior. How best to listen and join in social conversations are your biggest challenges. An investor. Who sees this from the investor's perspective? 2. Very good. Not unusual, that response. Very few of us are in that. So here's the IPA sample, the beta sample. We had a whole load of improvisers. Now, I don't know whether that's because it's a beta sample and what that universe that sample was taken from and how representative they were of anyone, but we'll have a fuller view later in the year, which we'll report back to you on. And had very, very little down here. Whereas, having computed the results for Sydney so far, we got to that. Which is interesting. I don't know if it tells us anything because we know anything about the sample, which is something we might come back to. But if you see yourself that way, then there's stuff you need to recognise that that's your style, and there are other things you need to work on, other things you need to add to your skill to be all-rounded. But the very poor score for investor there, if we want to make a business case for social, you need to work a bit more on that for sure. Okay, so now the next bit is there were free books offered as an incentive. Rob Harding and Jane Ketterley, is that right? Ketterby. Where are you? Rob? Okay, come and get them. Here we go. I'm afraid I've ruined the resale value by signing them. Seriously, I know that when I sign a book, you're welcome. When I sign a book, the retail value does go down. My planning department of Ogilvy, some time ago, managed to put half a dozen copies on eBay the day that I gave out. Signed copies. So, here we go. So this is the guide I'm going to talk about today. It's the one that I think is most pertinent to what we're talking about in effectiveness. And it's not the answer, but it is pretty good practice. And has some really good case studies in there and some good guidance of what to do to get to a better way of evaluating the effectiveness of what you do. And I'll give you this is a sort of gold standard case. This is from Mondelez and Kantar Worldwide did this. And it doesn't look very fancy, but it is really important. And this is a summary of what is a very beautifully written case. It basically says that telly does work. It's an uplift factor. Facebook does work too, but clearly there's reach issues with Facebook. But if you put telly and Facebook together, it gives you 66% more uplift than you imagined. So that's a really, really good investment conversation to be had with a particular set of creative over an extended time period. You don't look very surprised or very pleased by that. We don't normally talk about social as if it was that important. It needs to be talked about that way because that's going to be 20% of our budget. We need to take as much care there, not just throw out likes, retweets, and how many people made it their homepage thing. Right. So the challenges in doing this are simple, and I'm going to give you my 4 things in a moment. But the challenges in doing effectiveness evaluation on social are similar to the ones that we face in doing advertising. So, for example, you could think about a particular kind of social media activity as a bit like TV, in that it's designed to build long-term impressions of the brand and long-term preference as well as short-term stuff. You could think about it as we evaluate PR. We know how to evaluate PR and its contribution to business performance. So you could think about it that way, because a lot of time we set an objective of word of mouth, and we like people talking about it or sharing our stuff. That's really good. We could think about it, like couponing, because very often there's a short-term activation piece that's baked in, so we can get some kind of excuse for doing this, if you like. Sorry, rather cynical view there. So you could think about it the same, but it's very different. It's very different in 2 or 3 ways that are really important. The first of which is it's changing all the time. One of the advantages we have in looking at advertising effectiveness is that essentially the media environment has not changed very much in most of the developed markets for quite a long period of time. So there's some certain level of certainty there, or consistency. But social is changing all of the time. 10 years ago, Zuckerberg was still in high school. It is going all of the time it's changing. And so we can't draw many of the same specific conclusions that we imagine we can. So this year's findings may be different to next year's finding. Another thing that's really important here is that this is a medium or a set of media or a set of technologies that people are using to communicate with each other. And the third thing is it's lots of things. So trying to say it's a single thing and setting up a simple evaluation is not that easy. There are 4 things I think we found useful as to drawing out the conclusions here, but it's up to you. Please read the guide, say what you think, and do your own cases as well. The first thing is about data, and it's unusual when you think about effectiveness evaluation. You start with data rather than the objectives, but I think it's important in social because one of the things that social was sold on as a medium was that you could count everything. There were so many things that you could measure, and therefore it would be entirely accountable. Entirely accountable in the way that those lazy, old, mainstream media weren't. You could just tell, right? And you could really target people, and you know who they were and what they did, and it would be really precise. And none of that waste that we saw before, that waste word, none of that waste. The truth is, there's just too much data. The volume of data that's being generated, you know, you can have a metric, for example, exposure to a TV ad, which is fairly simple to take as a feed. How many people do we think, on the basis of the survey, saw this ad? Right, that's enough. You can even think how many people, ask people, do they remember it or recognize it, that you think is more important. There are so many different dimensions that we can pull out from one Facebook video. So many different dimensions, and we get so excited. Because look, we can measure all this stuff. No, actually, we're counting all this stuff. We're counting it all, and it's sort of a shame, really, because we've been lured in by the apparent abundance of data so that we think we can prove anything with it. All too often, more data in any field, more data means actually more noise and less signal. Just because you can measure it every moment of every day doesn't mean you should. What difference is it going to make to know that Dove's peak sales are on a Thursday are between 7:19 and 7:27? Not much, really. It's not going to change much, is it? But you can measure it. It's really exciting. Let's measure it. And even though we've got a more sophisticated view of consumer psychology and their buying behavior, then they like it. We can measure likes, so let's measure that and let's report back on it. And what we end up with is it's a bit like being in a Star Wars fighter pilot. Sort of, you just had so many dials and brilliant. And one of the worst things you can do, we've learned, is simply focus on dashboards, because dashboards assume that the connection that you see, you sense between things, different dials and different flashing lights, is what's there. It's not correlation. Very often it's just a fake sense of correlation, a fake sense of things being connected. And you just get really overexcited by all these numbers. It's brilliant. As my friend Hugh MacLeod puts it this way, we have to work even harder with social than we do with mainstream media marketing campaigns to turn information, that's the data, and we've got so much more of it, and we don't know where it comes from, we don't know what it represents, into knowledge. It's really, 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 really hard. And let's accept that rather than pretend that the intern with a nice piece of data viz can tell us what the answer is. It's not good enough. We talked about Rachel talked about modelling the data, mixed media modelling previously. There's some good stuff done in this area about social. So Nielsen have shown us that if you're not really careful, you can actually underestimate the importance of social in driving business metrics. And that's kind of a shame, really. It comes from when you look at social in isolation, because it's not an isolated thing anymore. Let's come back to that in a moment again. It's no mistake, no chance that we called this report measuring, not counting. Measuring is much harder than counting. Measuring is knowing what things you need to look at, in what way, because they affect the important things in the business. And you're not looking at the things that aren't important, and you're not looking at things in the wrong way. That's sort of dependent on this role thing, which is that, what do we want social to do? And as I've suggested, social is not a thing. It's many things, many wonderful things. Many different things, some of which will be gone tomorrow, some of which will return in a new form. And because it's many things, it's really hard to talk about how they work. But you need to, before you start the campaign, you need to be clear, what are you trying to do with this? Why social to do a particular job rather than just, of course, and the Twitter campaign is this, and the Facebook thing is this, and we're on Snapchat. It's really cool. It's really cool. Awesome. The other thing, of course, about social today is that it is woven into businesses. Even if businesses aren't using it at an enterprise level, customers are, consumers are. So it exists as a thing that you have to take account of. It's a feedback loop you have to take account of. And one of the best examples in the case studies is Transport for London. So they run all the buses and tubes and trains and so on in London. And it allowed them to de-silo their operation because they all have the same Twitter feeds. They all see the same stuff going on. And operations and marketing and insight can all work together to resolve things. It's a very interesting change that's happening. It's kind of what they promised us in social media boot camp, but it's only in organizations like this can you tell it's the case. What it means is if you're running let's say, an acquisition program through social media for Transport London, that you have to know all this other stuff that's going on in the background. You can't pretend anymore that this is just you doing some cool stuff. That's the only thing that matters. You have to do that. One of the issues in doing so is that the things that we find easiest to measure on social are the ones which drive short-term response. So couponing and discounts and that kind of stuff, rather than important stuff. There's a great case study in here, and I don't think anyone's ever going to get to this that I know of. I'm not sure I actually personally want to be involved in doing this because it's not my cup of tea. This is a whole enterprise view that, and it's typical, if you ever work with Reckitt, this is how they go. I know PepsiCo are going the same way, seeing social within the larger picture of the organization and the levers and buttons it's trying to press in order to generate the kind of behaviors and behavior change it wants. Don't have to get that far, but you do have to acknowledge that stuff's going on out there, and that social is in the world of, it is covering the whole thing. So third then, causation and correlation. This is, I mentioned it's one of Les's things. He beat me about it when I was younger and worked with him. I showed you this chart graph before. There is a subtle change to the title, though. This is not a time series graph. We find time series graphs so much easier to read, right? So here's one. The blue line is Google searches in New York for solar eclipse last week. The brown line is my eyes hurt. So, right, it's cool, isn't it? Cool. I suspect there might be not just a correlation here, even though I haven't mathematically demonstrated there is a correlation, but just naively I said there's probably a correlation. I suspect it might be causal in some way. It's so easy to find correlations and do a gag about them. You know, this is Tom Fishburne's great thing on this, and I like my hair. What's I've got left of it, and I'm not giving it up easy. It's easy to see correlations where there are none. The bottom one here is my favorite here, which is number of people who died in the US by becoming tangled in their bed sheets, it's the red line, and total revenue generated by skiing facilities in the US. Really, really close, right? Really, really close. It's too easy to say this happened and this went up. But many of the cases that we see, even from award-winning papers, go, this happened, this, and the business went up. It's just not good enough. It doesn't look strong enough in front of the people we have to convince, the people who will be wanting to take the budget away. Finally then, influence. And this is my specialist subject. I've written a book called Heard, I'll Have What She's Having, and copy, copy, copy. It's a big deal. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. Most of our ideas about influence are pretty pony. That's my other word for bollocks. You've seen this video, I'm sure. Yeah, the dancing guy? We're just going to let him play because he's, you know. Now, this has been sent to me. I've counted now 147 times. Mark, you must see this. It just shows you there can be real leaders and innovators. There can be people who make everyone else do what there are influences in the market, and that's why we need to target them, because if you find the influencers, they will tell everyone else what to do or get them to do it, and the game's over, right? So much easier than doing this silly, reaching lots of people marketing. So you know how it goes. So that's Nigel there, by the way. What a name. What a name for a cult hero, Nigel. And his friend, yeah. There's going to be a fat friend at the moment, which I always find is the way to get a party going. He's going to come tumbling down the hill, and there he's in after everyone else is going to want to play. Any moment now. There he is. Hurrah! So once he comes in, there's, you know, it's not long before everyone else is there. Now, this, I'll just leave that running in the background. You can see people beginning to go there. There's a girl here at the front. You'll see her in a yellow dress. That one there with the dark hair. she's really quite taken by this, but then most people are quite taken by seeing these crazy guys. If you ever go to this kind of event, you'll know there's always some guy with his shirt off going, gone too early, mate, gone too early. I know everyone wants to do it. She will actually do a bit of a yoga stretch just in order to prepare herself to go when she finally leaps off. But everyone wants to do it now. It's fantastic. So this tells us, this illustrates, I think, or reinforces this view that there are influences in a market all the time, people we have to get to. They start things, they're the trend leaders, get to them and everyone else will follow. It's just great. Yoga stretch. Yeah, and run. Go, go, go. Go on. Yeah, she's going to go now. Go on. One more time. Hair. Bye. So, but it's a good demonstration. That's why it got sent to me so many times of this really rather fake idea that there are influencers who shape everyone's behaviour. And it's very plausible. It's very plausible, but it's nonsense. Most human networks aren't structured that way. Here's a piece of work from Nick Christakis and James Fowler. This is a piece of real-world social network analysis. So this is 32 years of social network analysis of the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. It's from a famous study they did, an analysis of the data set. The yellow dots you're looking at there, I'm sorry, it's not very good quality. That's what academics tend to present, very poor quality visuals like that. And it's an old one, so no, it wasn't meant like that, Rachel. Other social scientists, that's okay. And they, you'll see the yellow dots, they're obese people. And over the course of simulation, the obese people get larger in number, and they get bigger and fatter, and they move to the center of the social network. So let's just watch them. The thing here is that as you watch them, they'll just sort of move around a bit, and the yellow dots get bigger and bigger, and more of them, and they move to the center. This is a real social network, like most human social networks are. It's not hub and spoke with some special person like Nigel making the rest of us do what we don't want to do. They're connected, and influence is mutual. And the network is dynamic over time. It's not fixed. Every time you go back to watch one of Nigel's things, the network will have changed again. And let me just say, as it occurred to you when you watched that Nigel video, that he was in a field on a sunny afternoon at a dance festival with lots of people who'd paid to be at a dance festival, who'd probably had a drink, maybe one or two of them had a smoke, and he said, let's go dancing. You didn't see the 6 times he tried to get them to do it before, because it was his 7th attempt. Was it much to do with Nigel? Was he really that influential? Or would they probably have done it sometime themselves? Anyway. Look, structure of networks is really, really important in understanding social influence. You've got to be smart about it. There are ways to do it. Don't get caught up in the detail. Look at the type of structure you're dealing with, rather than imagine that it's always going to be influencer kind. This is from my buddy, Hugh McLeod at Gaping Void. Please use that. He loves it. Sinan Aral, who teaches in the US at MIT, has done some really good work in unpicking the big claims made for social influence in media and marketing. And again, this is referenced in the guide. He talks about homophily, which is not a lifestyle choice. Well, it is really, actually, because it's birds of a feather flock together. Thinking again of the dance festival with Nigel, there were people there who liked dance music, who played money for it. It's a sunny day. Was it really influence, or would they have done it anyway because they're gathered together? Were they influencing each other? Maybe, but not as much as we might have thought if we'd just seen it for the first time and not thought about them that way. So homophily can lead you to overstate social influence when it's not there, and therefore make claims that can easily be rebutted by any decent analyst. And here's the final thing. Social media world is great. And it really is valuable. And we've got lots of cases that demonstrate the business contribution it can make in lots of different ways in this database. But please let's not imagine that social media is ever going to be as powerful as real-world social influence. Ed Keller, who's probably the daddy of the word-of-mouth movement, puts it this way. His studies point to a ratio like that. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, 9 to 1. 9 times more powerful face-to-face, real-world social influence as opposed to social media influence. Now, that doesn't mean that social media doesn't work. It just means that it's not going to be as cool and as awesome as we hoped. as they told us. It's going to have a role to play, and we need to demonstrate what that role is and what the value of to the businesses of it. But let's not get carried away too much, really. In going about doing this better, there are a couple of things. First of all, read the guide, please. And secondly, use some really basic stuff. Stephen King, one of the founders of planning in the UK from JWT, asked these simple questions, which we should all be using all of the time, baking in the ability to evaluate effective work. Where are we now? Why are we there? Where could we be? How could we get there? Are we there yet? The difference, we need to ask all of these things and be really clear, ask what the role of social is going to be. How could we get there? Are we getting there? Social gives us the opportunity to do more mid-term, mid-race course correction. But don't get caught up in doing it when it's not going to make much difference. Think about the decisions that are going to be made on the back of it. So that's an opportunity that social gives us that other channels don't. 5-point plan, if you want to do it. These are probably the best way to do it. If you were to take social out of it, it would be advertising. It's the same stuff. Ask yourself, I started with data, ask yourself what's the appropriate data. Not just take the data you're given, not just take tweets and mentions and retweets and likes and all. That may or may not be important depending on what you're trying to do. The guide really helps with this. I found it very useful. I got thrown in to do some evaluation recently on a big client of mine work, which I hadn't done for a few years, and it saved my arse. I hope it'll save yours. Please download it, it's for free. Please give us feedback on it. Please take the quiz so I can have some more numbers to show them when I get to Melbourne next week. And any questions, well, I'll be around later. Thank you very much.